Okay, I think I might be live. So if somebody would maybe indicate in the chat whether I am, I'm going to wait for just a minute till some other people can join. And does it sound good? Somebody just say, hey, it sounds great. Okay, great. So let me I have been trying to do this for a few days. I appreciate your patience. Last week was pretty busy. As you know, I had to take PM got taken to the ER a couple weeks ago. And then we've had a bunch of follow-up doctor appointments and that type of thing. So tonight I'm doing it like no green screen. That's just my messy office and some stuff we still haven't unpacked from when we moved a couple of years ago. And I have a few things I want to talk to you about. Don't have a lot of graphics or anything like that. I've got a few articles I'm going to try to share, but the world is just absolutely crazy, as you probably have noticed. So I'm going to start off. This is where I'll tick everybody off. I'm going to start off with a couple comments about just a little bit follow up of some of the comments that I made on the Asbury revival that they're calling it from this past couple of weeks. I have not yet had a chance to look at the Collegiate Day of Prayer video that was put out, that was live streamed today. I'll try to watch that between now and Sunday. I will continue to express that at least we need to take a wait and see attitude on this. I'm not sure why everyone has to jump on the bandwagon that this is great and this is everything right away. We have to do this instant analysis like we're doing commentary on the Super Bowl or something like that. I'm just not sure I understand that. I did share an article on Sunday by a guy I don't even know. I just saw it. I read it. It really spoke to me. Again, if you want, you can contact me through the email at fbchapel.com if you want to get a copy of that article. I'll get the email. I'll respond. I know I've sent it out probably close to 100 times. I also came across a Facebook post today that I thought was very well thought out by Todd Baker. I haven't seen Todd. He may be a Facebook friend of mine. I don't know. I think he was doing or had taken over some of the ministry duties of Zola Levitt Ministries when Zola died back in probably 2006 or 7. Zola was a very dear friend. But anyway, if you go to Todd Baker's Facebook page, you can find the article that he posted just, I think, today. I think that it's very well thought out. And again, I will express to you my dismay and disgust at people who are fully on board with the quote revival and great move of God. And when someone wants to be careful and analyze it and see how it goes, they're a Pharisee quenching the spirit. And I've even seen people use that you're influenced by demons if you're not fully on board with this. Folks, this is egregious slander against fellow brothers and sisters in the body of Christ. We are told in the New Testament to test everything to see if it's of the Lord. So some of us are taking a wait and see, and some of us have concerns. I think I expressed the concern that I had that there had been a very heavy influence of spiritual formation at Asbury. When I was researching this 10 years ago, this led to my separation from a church that Pam and I had attended for almost 30 years. It led to a separation and a request for me to resign from the board of trustees of the college and seminary where Pam and I had attended, and a board on which I had served for 25 years. And I questioned the spiritual formation program, the mysticism that was coming in. I stand by everything that I said 10 years ago. You can go to Eric Barger's website. I think the article might still be up there. I haven't checked for a long time. I wrote about a 6-8 page article on spiritual formation and mysticism. I did TV shows. I've done talks about this. And there's a very heavy element of this at Asbury. And it's something that they need to repent of. And they have not repented of that. So that causes me concern. And then there was also sort of the timing. There was a big article about the Collegiate Day of Prayer and how there was going to be a great collegiate outpouring. Somebody had a word of knowledge or a prophecy about that. Then a week after that, in early February, there was a video released by Francis Chan through the Collegiate Day of Prayer that they were going to live stream this great outpouring Collegiate Day of Prayer thing. Francis Chan and my good friend Rick Warren, who I have done many talks about and concerns about the things that he's been into. And you don't need to write to me. I know what Rick Warren's into. I've been to his church many times. I've read his stuff. So you don't need to admonish me like I need more witnesses or something like that. The fact that these two guys are coming to Asbury today, and I think it's already taken place, and they're doing it in this exact same room that this revival has been taking place, there is a concern that it might have been contrived. So I don't know. Look, I hope people are getting saved. I hope people are repenting of their sins. But I really think that between the article I shared on Sunday and Todd Baker's article, who does just a phenomenal series of analyzing things that have come into evangelicalism from the emerging church, the all truth is my truth, or my truth is what my truth is. It's what I say and not what the scripture is. I saw another great article. I can't remember the man's name. He's way smarter than I am. He has a doctorate, I think, and a good thinker. I think it was G3 Ministries, and he had talked about the fact that, this discipleship, the methodology of evangelism and discipleship is a very kind of slow, messy process. And everybody wants to truncate it and make it easy. And I'm not so sure that trying to jump into that this is a great move of God may not be. Listen, I would just ask people to humbly consider whether this pushing this out there, that this is this fantastic thing and we've got to all be on board with it, is itself maybe a bit of a distraction, in that it's very similar to the claim, and I'm sure you've seen these claims made, that millions of Muslims are turning to the Lord through dreams and visions. Now, I communicated last night with someone that we support at our church, and this person has gone into Muslim areas at great risk to his life. He told me he knows of one area in a Muslim area that goes across a number of countries in the Middle East, and that there are maybe 1,000 missionaries have been sent in there over the last decade. And if they have 11 converts between them, that would be generous. Now, doesn't mean they're unsuccessful, that they're not doing the right thing. But on the one hand, I hear some people making the claim millions of Muslims have come to Christ. I personally, I don't see evidence of this. I maybe it's there. I pray that it's there. I hope that it's there. But by saying that, oh, well, they have dreams and visions and they come to know the Lord, that gets away from what the church is supposed to do in terms of discipleship, evangelism and discipleship, which can be a messy thing. In my own tradition, Grace Brethren tradition, there was a couple, the Gribbles, James and I think her name was Alice. And back around the time of World War I, they believed that they were to go as missionaries to Central Africa. At the time, it was French Equatorial Africa, later became the Central African Republic. in the Grace Brethren. We had a big work in the Central African Republic, but it took a very long time to get it up and running. And we had missions, we had dental, we had evangelism, we had churches. About 1/4 of the country would attend a Grace Brethren church every Sunday. So we're talking hundreds of thousands. Whatever Grace Brethren there were in the United States, there were 15 times that number in Central Africa, in a small country in Central Africa. Now, that church has had a lot of problems. There's been revolution. There's been a lot of Muslim infiltration. And I'm not sure how well the church is held together in the Central African Republic. All the missionaries that were there had to be pulled out probably 15 years ago, 10, 15 years ago, because of the political situation and rebellion and that type of thing. And it's a very, very bad place right now. But my point is, like, when the Gribbles went to Central Africa, James Gribble was there, and I may not remember the details of the story. It's been a while since I shared it. Gribble was there for a decade and never saw a convert. That's somehow, so you understand that there's not this instantaneous thing. This sharing the gospel thing and going out and evangelism and discipleship is a long-term, sometimes messy, sometimes in terms of how humans view it, a very unrewarding thing. Gribble died never seeing a convert. Was he faithful to the Lord? Did he help start a great move of God? He did. I know that later we had a couple that from our church that were like grandparents to me, went to they were there for 40 years, and they would come back and they would tell us, and they eventually went to Chad in Cameroon also. But what Gribble started eventually resulted in hundreds of thousands of people being involved in what were then Grace Brethren churches in that country. But it took decades. It took a long time. And so my concern is when we truncate something in that, oh, look at this instantaneous thing that's happening, I'm not so sure it's not a distraction to get us away from the work that we're supposed to be doing on a day-to-day basis. That's just my observation. And again, I'm sure there's some good things that have happened down there, okay? But I've seen some videos of things that concern me. Slaying in the spirit, totally unbiblical, and people are doing it. So again, some of us, we're old. And the way I view it is I'm 1 year closer to maybe shooting my age in golf. I've been close, been within a stroke, but I need that extra year. So maybe this year is my year. But we've been around the church for a long time, and we've seen things. There's a movie coming out this week on the Jesus Revolution from the Calvary Chapel movement. And that's been a great move of God. It transformed, whole communities in Southern and in California, especially where it started. I mean, I have friends who were members at Cal Berkeley. They were I think the guy one of my friends was the president of the Students for Democratic Society. And he got saved. And he just passed away. He spent 60 years in full-time Christian ministry. So there are these great moves, but they don't happen instantaneously, is my point. And so when you see them instantaneously, then maybe we just ought to kind of catch your breath, analyze what's going on. But listen, if you're talking about a great move of God and you're calling your fellow brothers and Christians in the Lord Pharisees or influenced by demons, I just think you need to take a chill pill and think about what you're doing, because I think you are grieving the Holy Spirit And as I said Sunday, and I stand by this, if you're doing that, maybe it's you who needs the revival. Okay. So, and I'm not, like I said, I'm all for this happening. But listen, I remember Toronto. I remember Brownsville. I remember Lakeland. And they were all fake. They were all unbiblical. And the same thing was being said back then as being said now. This is a great move of God. You got to get on board. You got to get on board with it. And it didn't last. So let's pray this one lasts. But there's a lot of work that needs to be done if people are being converted and saved. There's a lot of work at discipleship. So Todd Baker article, I would highly recommend. I didn't have time to analyze it in detail. And I don't even know if I agree with everything that Todd Baker says. The guy that I recommended the article on Sunday, I don't know if I agree with everything that he says. But when I see somebody who writes something that I think is well thought out, then I think that just, let's analyze it. Let's watch. Let's see what happens. But if there is stuff, we need to call out the bad stuff. Okay. And I've seen enough of that there that I'm concerned about. So, anyway, okay, let me move on to something else now that I've offended enough people there. And, I'm not even sure where to go with this. So, okay, so I'm going to share my screen here a little bit so you don't have to look at me in all my glory. I haven't done this for a couple weeks, so give me a minute to... here we go. Okay. Okay, so here's something you can pray about. So I've been, Jack Hibbs at Calvary Chapel, Chino Hills, has been a friend of mine for a long time. And we don't agree on everything, okay? That's fine. He was a very good friend to me when I needed a friend. So he put up a video just a couple hours ago, said that his YouTube channel had been taken down. And one of the things he said was a copyright claim had been made. A couple copyright claims have been made against this channel, one by A&E, another by Telemundo. And I haven't had a chance to talk to him. I've got messages to him and emails and that type of thing, and I haven't heard from him. But let me just see if but there was this article, and if you can get it at the Washington Post, I would highly recommend, because I think you're going to understand what's going on here. And there's some people interviewed for this article that I know, and I've known that this was coming for a couple months, and it was just published. So it's called "Leaked Files Reveal Reputation Management Firms' Deceptive Tactics." And what's happening in the abuse of the legal system on copyrights with YouTube channels and other things. If you have content that people don't like, they are making up, I don't know how else to say it, fake copyright claims against you. So for example, let's say you write an article that is critical of, well, here's something we could say, the Clinton suicide curse. And I'm sorry for the picture there that's showing up in all of its high definition glory. But so here's this guy. He is, this is reported in the Daily Mail. He's a Clinton aide linked to Jeffrey Epstein. He was found hung from a tree by wire with a shotgun blast to his chest, no gun around. And 9 months after this happened, his death has now been ruled a suicide. So this is how some people think. Bad people a certain couple that were in power in the United States and still have a lot of influence, control things. But what's happening then now, people are trying to get rid of content that they don't like. And what they're doing is they're hiring these reputation management firms. And so, like as Sean says in his article here, and I apologize, I'm not trying to make anybody sick. So what these guys do is they create fake articles about someone. So let's say somebody attacks the Clintons. What this reputation management firm will do is a couple things. They will go out and they will create fake articles and pepper the internet with them on a bunch of different sites so that when people search for something about, person XYZ, they'll get all of these articles, which are very positive. And so what they do is if somebody has a bad reputation, this is a way to whitewash that bad reputation and make them look good. But they're also doing something else, is they will also, let's say you put up an article criticizing an organization, Open Society Foundation. Now, I don't know that Open Society Foundation has done this, but some NGOs have done this. What they do is they hire somebody to, I don't like that article being out there. What are you going to do? And what they do is they take the article, create a website, and put the article on that website and say, hey, WordPress or YouTube, that's my article. They're violating my copyright. They stole my article word for word, when in fact it's been the other way around, and people are having their content removed. So I suspect that this is what might have happened to Chino Hills, to Jack Hibbs, Real Life with Jack Hibbs. So I'm looking into it. It's very deceptive. So you need to understand that in this world, when we live with this, for example, here's an opinion article, how to reduce the risk from AI's original sin. All these images that people are using on this. So this is a article in today's Washington Post talking about the fact that it's going to get very difficult to determine what's real. And it's already hard enough when you put up your own content and everything, somebody else comes along and says, oh, wait a minute, I put that up 2 years ago. They're stealing my stuff. And the AI that's used to manage copyright claims at YouTube and other places isn't very bright. They don't look into it. And you can have your whole ministry effectively destroyed. So FBC, go to Rumble, Real FBC. I don't broadcast live there because there's certain codes and things that I need, and I just haven't had time to figure them out. We do stream live on the Fellowship Bible Chapel app. We do stream live on Facebook, but those Facebook and YouTube are going away, and I don't think we're long for this world on those. So pray for Jack and Chino Hills. And believe me, this is not the first ministry, the last ministry that's going to go through this. It's going to come fast and furious. So here's something, let's see what I want to talk about. Here's a good article from the Epic Times. Of course, they, hang on a second here. This article here, this is something to watch. U.S. negotiates deal to give WHO authority over pandemic policies. This is very concerning. This is an end run. This is typical. This is out of Obama's playbook. This is what they did with the JCPOA. It should have been approved by the Senate as a treaty, which requires a 2/3 approval for it to have the force of law in the United States. But following the rule of law and everything to people on the left, like the Biden administration, the Obama administration, the Biden administration, now the combined Biden administration, is not something you do. So this is very concerning, the way they're working this international to give WHO authority. All they have to do is declare, oh, there's a pandemic, and then they will be able to control everything. And you're going to bring in passports, health ID, and all this other stuff. So it's very concerning. So I don't really have time to go into it. I'll try to talk a little bit more about it on Sunday. But what do they say at the airport? The pattern is full already, pretty much, with what I want to talk about on Sunday. So let me let's see. Let me go on here to. I'm just going to talk about this briefly. More on Sunday. Tomorrow's the 1-year anniversary of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And I do want you to keep that in mind, that it was Russia that invaded Ukraine. Putin has come out. He gave a big speech yesterday, and or maybe it was 2 days ago, saying, I'm withdrawing from START. This is a war by the U.S., the West against Russia. You're all at fault, and that type of thing. And he's put his some of his nuclear fleet, aircraft missiles on high alert. I believe that the U.S. DEFCON warning has moved up a notch to like DEFCON 2. And the world is probably closer to nuclear war than we were during the Cuban Missile Crisis back in 1962. And I was 8 years old then, and I remember, my mother being very upset. The TV was on, the black and white TV with the UN and Khrushchev and everything. And I asked my mom, are we going to have a nuclear war? And she said, we might. So if somebody asked me if we had a nuclear war, I would say we might. We're closer, I think, now than we were in 1962. The world is in a very volatile place. And this all falls into what I would call the wars and rumors of wars of the end times. And the conflict is everywhere. I always hesitate to do this because people get very upset with me when I do this. So I don't agree with him politically, eschatologically, on a lot of things. And I only cite him because he's a little bit more high profile than I am. I've talked about Putin and his motivation for a long time. In his speech, Putin gave this thing like, oh, the West is into pedophilia and they can't tell whether transgender kids and that type of thing are even true. And there's a story at NPR yesterday about, Russia or Florida is so awful. They're stopping puberty blockers and that type of thing for young people. And they never tell you the story after story after story after story of all the people who had these transition surgeries and hormone treatments and everything, and now regret it. And the emotional, physical, mental damage from this is just absolutely crazy. So Putin cites this in his speech. And I can guarantee you, I could probably pick about a half dozen YouTube channels that are very pro-Russian because of this, because Putin says this. And he mentioned, I think in the speech, it was about 2 hours long. By the way, a lot of speculation that Putin's very ill, very sick. I have no idea. And I think nobody who's speculating has any idea. All I can say is I see him go to a conference and sit on stage for 4 hours. And from what I've seen, doesn't even get up and go to the bathroom, which is pretty good for a guy who's in 70. I think he's a year or two older than I am. I think he's 70. And he gave this speech the other night for like an hour, 50 minutes. You can find it. The best version of it I found was at Sky News, the Australian channel. And I would recommend that you at least go and get it. You can go to the Kremlin website and you can download a transcript of what he said. But this is John's personal view. I do not trust Vladimir Putin. Okay? And while what he says about the moral depravity of the West is accurate and what I agree with, you need to understand that This is an evil guy. Okay. The elites in our country and world that are doing this to our culture are evil. They're bad. We don't like them. So the fact that I criticize Putin doesn't mean that I support them. The fact that I criticize Putin and Russia's actions in Ukraine does not mean that I'm totally pro-Ukrainian, although I have somewhat different view about that. Listen, one country invaded Ukraine last year. Okay. And Putin says, oh, they were threatening my borders, but now he's moved closer to all those borders that he claims were threatening him. That doesn't make any sense to me. This has been a long-standing thing. And when you talk to people that live over there, and I've talked to pastors and missionaries and stuff in Ukraine, and they will tell you that you get a whole different view. And when you talk to Russian people, or you talk to Ukrainian people, they will say, well, back in 850 AD, they did this to us, and we got to get this rectified. They're fighting wars and grievances that have been around for 1,500 years. So understand you layer that on top of the modern world. But so back in 2014, actually, I've cited this article at Foreign Affairs. Now, remember what was going on in 2014. There was a revolution in Ukraine to overthrow what was to then a pro-Russian government. And I see a lot of things like, it was the CIA did this, and, this was forced on it and all this. Listen, when you talk to Ukrainian people, they will say, we didn't like those Russian guys. We didn't want them around. We supported that. And when we came to vote, we voted for Zelensky because we liked him. So there's a whole different view when you talk to people in Ukraine. So everybody, we all think we know everything in the West. So I'm willing to say I'm not really sure I like everybody over there. But back in 2014, there were a couple things that happened. There was, and I see I'm already going way over the time that I plan to go, but so be it. I'll talk until, if you don't want to listen, thanks for tuning in, and I'll talk more about Sunday. By the way, Child of the King, it's Todd Baker. I think he's got a minute. I think he might have been with Zola Levitt Ministries for a while. He's a Dallas Seminary grad down in Dallas, and he writes. He just did a good article. You can find him on Facebook. So anyway, so back to Putin. So 2014, the revolution takes place. A pro-Western guy comes in, and we can agree there's corruption and all this other stuff. We're not disputing that. In about April 2014, I was subscribed to Investors Business Daily. It was sort of like a Wall Street Journal type for investors, or people who think they're investors and that type of thing. And eventually it's kind of gone away. But Investors Business Daily, there was this very strange article for a business paper. And the article was that Putin had come up with this. Let me see if I can find this. Lady of Kazan. It's an icon. And here's a picture of it. Black Madonna. This was the most revered icon in the Russian church. When Russia went into battle, and I always get my battles mixed up. When they went into battle, this icon would lead the Russian troops. It has this very, in the Russian Orthodox Church, it has this very mystical quality to it. When they battled Napoleon, and I always say the wrong battle, when they battled Napoleon, and you can look up where that battle took place, so I don't inaccurately stated. This icon was put at the forefront of the troops. And this is a very important icon. Let me show you a meeting that Putin had. If I can find the images. Well, I saw the. Here we go. So here's a picture. This is from the German website. Putin meets the Pope. So let's scroll down here and let's see what happens. And lo and behold, it doesn't show up real well, but you can kind of see it there. So you can go to dw.com, English version, and throw up. What are they doing now? Here is this icon. I'll open it in a separate window so maybe we can get away from the ads. So let me blow that up. So this is Putin and John Paul II meeting at the Vatican about 2004. I'm fascinated by this because it comes from a business newspaper. It was actually based on a blog post that a Arab guy had done. And so you see there on the table between them is this Lady of Kazan, the Black Madonna. That Madonna, actually, what happened was the original one got destroyed. So they made up a replica and it was sort of lost to history. And it shows up, of all places, at Fatima, Portugal, where those visions took place in 1917, the three shepherd children. And one of those was a supposed prophecy or directive about consecrating Russia to the heart of my mother. And so supposedly these were secret, kept within the Vatican, that type of thing. These things were demonic visions, in my opinion. But the people at Fatima brought that icon and gave it to Pope John Paul II, and it was his favorite icon. And he placed it in his private chapel, and he prayed to that icon every day. But his goal, his long-term goal was he wanted to return that icon to Russia, where he thought it belonged. And he hoped to take it himself to Russia. But he got sick. But there was a big ceremony at the Vatican in 2004, 2005, where they consecrated this icon, and one of the leading cardinals of the Catholic Church took it to Russia and gave it to Putin, and it was placed in a church. I believe for a time it was placed in a church in the Kremlin. But in 2014 now, the Investors Business Daily comes out and says what Putin had done was he had taken this icon and he had flown it around the Crimean Peninsula. Now, this has been a long goal. So Putin says the worst thing that happened was the collapse in the 20th century was the collapse of the Soviet Union. And he wants to restore that. And Ukraine is a big part of that. And he was concerned that he wasn't going to be able to have a warm water port. So he took over the Crimean Peninsula in 2014. So there was an article. So earlier before that Crimea thing had done, the people at the Council on Foreign Relations had written this big article published March 31st, 2014. I think this was before the Crimea invasion, called Putin's Brain. So you need to understand that what's going on in Ukraine now didn't just happen in 2022. This has been going on in Putin's mind for a couple decades, and in Russia's brain and philosophers for centuries. I think that's the best way to say it. So there's this guy named Alexander Dugin, and he has this very mystical part to him. And one of the things he believes is the West is totally corrupt, and the West must be annihilated and destroyed. And then Russia will rise to the fore, and we will have this great, quote, Christian, really Russian Orthodox world. So it's a very totalitarian philosophy and it ties in church and all these things. For example, Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who was tortured in the Gulag archipelago, he was tortured by the Soviets, and he was able to get out, and he came to the U.S. and lived in New Hampshire for many years. But he returned to Russia because it was like in his DNA to be part of Mother Russia, and he became very good friends with Vladimir Putin. And you can look it up. When Solzhenitsyn died, there's Putin front and center at Solzhenitsyn's big fancy state funeral. But this Alexander Dugin guy has this philosophy, and I think it's best described as annihilationist philosophy. So I was talking about this back in 2014. And we just, as things kind of go along in this long-term thing when we're talking about all these things. So I'm just saying is that you need to understand Dugin. And I will say that probably, and this is where I'll get into trouble, probably the only person I know who's really talked about it, and probably better than I have, just because he has a bigger budget in research assistance, is Glenn Beck. And Glenn Beck talked about that yesterday or today on his podcast. And it's in the last half of his podcast, and you can get good information. So, usual disclaimers, I'm not endorsing everything that Glenn Beck says. I think he needs the Lord and that type of thing. But I think he's dead on right about Putin. So Putin takes this icon and he flies it around the word is he flew it around the Crimean Peninsula before the Crimean invasion, because you got to understand that there's this melding of church and state there, and it has this mystical thing. In fact, I was doing some research today, and here is a website that I came across, The Fourth Political Theory. And this is links, articles, books about Putin. So there's a tab for Fourth Political Theory, Against Liberalism, Eurasianism, Manifesto. And a lot of this is Dugin. And it's interesting. So here's this article by Alexander Dugin. So here's the thing. So you have the Putin's Brain article published March 31st, 2014. And then you have this Dugin article published 24 days before, Horizons of Our Revolution from Crimea to Lisbon. So you need to understand that there's more. So like right now we see that Russia seems to be interfering in Moldova. The government has failed there, and there's concerns that a Russian puppet government will be put in there. And this is what happened in Ukraine, and a lot of the Ukrainians did not like this. But look at some of the things that he says here. This is Dugin. This is the guy, the philosopher who seems to influence Putin. And in fact, there's some indication that people have studied this more detail than I have, that Dugin issues something, and it's not too long where Putin's talking about the same thing. Now, I think Putin today, if you cornered him, would say, and it kind of cracks me up because I was reading somebody else like, well, Ukraine, the West has cornered Russia. It's the largest country in the world, for crying out loud. Okay. And I don't know anybody really wants to invade Russia, but people want the government to fail. So, I grant all that. But look at what Dugin says back in 2014, around the time of the invasion of Crimea. Point one, we aren't going to limit ourselves by annexing Crimea. That for sure. Yesterday, the reunion with the Crimea was a victory for us. Okay, so I guess it was in March of 2014. So it was around the time that this icon was flown around and all this other stuff. Yesterday, the reunion with the Crimea was a victory for us. Today, this is infinitely small thing. Rates rise. The peoples of southeast of Ukraine are waking up gradually. It is exactly that long at harnessing and swift in riding. That's an old Russian proverb. All of the important is yet to come. We do not expect a quick victory. Everything is to be paid for. Now we are witnesses of a birth of a new political reality. That is why everything acquires special significance. So you need to understand that there's a philosophy behind what's going on there. And I think it was Beck in his podcast yesterday or today. I was just listening to it a couple hours ago. And he made a very important thing. And so when we talk about Gog, Magog, and whether Russia's involved, and we know Persia, that one's a lock, okay? And we know Meshach and Tubal, we know Turkey's involved. But then there's sort of a debate about Russia and Rosh. Now, I wish somebody would check this out. I'm going to throw something out there that I have not had a chance to check out yet. I have been told, there's the Prince of Rosh that's mentioned in Ezekiel 38. Someone has told me that in the Russian Bible, a Russian language Bible, it says Russia. When it says Rosh, it says Russia. So I don't know that. Somebody please check that out. I'm not good at reading Russian. But you understand there's a big picture here. So we know that there's Russia and Persia that's going to be involved in this. Now, I think it's later, further down the road, and I'm not so sure that there's not a big world war before all of that stuff starts to unfold. In fact, I think that's probably more likely, especially in light of what's going on today. And it's very concerning. You need to do some prep work if you're thinking and watching what's going on, because things could change radically in the next 2 weeks. I mean, this is very, very serious. But you need to understand that when we're looking at like, well, is Russia involved or not involved? Look, this is what the Ukrainian friend said to me. He says, well, John, what do you think? You got Persia supplying Russia with weapons, and they're using Persian weapons to attack Ukraine. And you have Russia bringing in Libyan and Ethiopian mercenary soldiers to attack Ukraine. So you're seeing all the alliances going, and that's sort of manifesting itself in Ukraine right at the moment. Very interesting point. But I think it was Glenn Beck today. Believe, folks, you have no idea. I'm like inundated with information and stuff, and I read and listen to all this stuff. But I think it was Glenn Beck today in the podcast about Dugin and Putin and that type of thing. And I think the point of his podcast was, listen, Putin may sound pro-family, anti-same-sex marriage and all that stuff. Don't fall for it, because the ultimate goal is the stuff that Dugin puts out, which is annihilation of the West. And it's for a different reason. And this, I don't think he put two and two together. He did say, listen, Jesus said there would be false Christs and messiahs that would come in the end times, and they would be deceptive. And his conclusion is Putin is one of these. He comes talking like, oh, this is, I'm anti-West. I'm pro-family. I'm different than those lunatics that are running the West into the ground. And okay, but what's behind it? Is he false? He's coming and tickling our ears with this stuff. And the point, too, is that where Russia appears to want to annihilate the West, because in bringing in this great, glorious Mother Russia, Russian Orthodox thing, Persia, Iran, wants to annihilate the West for different reasons, but for right now, they're totally united on this, and they're working together. And that's a very important point, I think, to be considered. So, standard Glenn Beck warnings, okay? But I want to give him credit for putting two and two together, because it's where I've been for 9 years since I first came across these articles in Investors Business Daily, Council on the Foreign Affairs Journal published by Council on Foreign Relations, and a bunch of reading. And if you read this Dugin guy, you're gonna get a taste for what I think is the philosophy that runs behind Vladimir Putin. And all of this stuff seems to fit within a very active end time scenario. that we're seeing here. So I would recommend that you do that. Somebody said, by the way, Bobby, I said I had cleaned out my email box to where I had 40,000 unread emails, but today it went back up above 60,000. So I'm going to do something. I may just declare email bankruptcy and just delete all of it. I think I also had, let me see, somebody mentioned the earthquakes in Turkey. This was kind of interesting. I don't know if I have all these Klaus Schwab videos, and I'm not going to torture you with those today, but you should prepare yourself mentally. You're going to hear them on Sunday for sure, just because I want to get them out of my inventory. And I guess I haven't picked that up yet, but if you look, you can find on some of the Telegram channels of Bible Prophecy Guys this been about 7,700 earthquakes in Turkey. And when you look at that on a map, it looks like there's a 7 over the area where all the earthquakes occurred. I don't have time to look for it right now. So anyway, so very interesting things here. Let me just make a couple more points and we'll move on. So here's, it's the Financial Times. It's Putin's speech. I don't have it. There's an interactive rail map. I wanted to say a few things about East Palestine. So I'm not sure how bad East Palestine is thus far. I don't think it's good. I think it's a very serious situation. By the way, we're 2.5 hours away. We're 150 miles upwind. Certainly what happened there was a very, very bad spill. I think that the government and railroad have lost all credibility. So that even if the water was safe, nobody's going to believe it. But you also have to analyze that there's an acute phase and a long-term phase to these rail spills. So everybody wants to compare it to the dioxin spills and contamination in Times Beach, Missouri, which happened over a period of decades. It was not just a one-time shot. But there's concern that when the vinyl chloride was burned, a controlled burn, it didn't look like a controlled burn to me. It looked like a big, giant mushroom cloud that, it released different byproducts of burning vinyl chloride, some of which could be dioxins, which nobody is talking about, and that's concerning. They should be testing for that. And it creates a phosgene gas, which is toxic. But the damage to phosgene, at least, it was used in World War I as a weapon, a chemical weapon, but it's going to kill you early on. You're not going to, excuse me, you're not going to survive a long time if you've got an acute toxic exposure to phosgene. So the one thing we can take a little bit of comfort in, and I use the term little bit advisedly, very advisedly, is that nobody died. And I'm not even sure that after this burn off of vinyl chloride and it blowing around, I'm not even sure that anybody's gone to the emergency room. Now, I could be totally wrong on that. I've not read whether anybody had significant enough symptoms to go to the emergency room. So maybe that's good news, maybe it's not, but there's still a big mess there to clean up. And people who use like Cincinnati and some Kentucky cities down the Ohio River, hundreds of miles away, have shut off their intake for the time being so they can test to see if there's any of the chemicals that were released there in the water supply. And that's, to me, it looks like that's a cautionary thing. It might be a political thing, but suffice it to say there's a big problem there that's caused the problems. Now, I did on another YouTube channel I did an interview, and I suggested that it could have been a Russian sabotage information. So there's a couple things you need to analyze. You got the derailment and the leaking tank cars and how you're going to deal with it. That's the aftermath of the derailment. But then you have the question is, how did the derailment occur in the first place? Was it sabotage? Was it poor maintenance? That type of thing. I mean, there was pictures of a hot box on the wheels of a couple cars 20 miles away in Salem, Ohio. There was also a lot of people said, well, Norfolk Southern just came in and burned this stuff off so they could get the rail line open. Now, I was looking at some of the interactive maps, and that rail line is still closed down. And it's a major Norfolk Southern rail line there. So it's still shut down. So it's been shut down for, I think the thing happened. I think tomorrow will be 3 weeks since the derailment took place. So if that's what Norfolk Southern did, burn stuff so they could get the rail line open. Well, it didn't work, did it? Because they're not open yet. And now they're blaming the fire chief in East Palestine. This is clearly a U.S. EPA thing. I mean, the EPA is in everybody's face about everything. And now they're sort of like, somebody else locally will handle it. I mean, was there a derailment? And you've seen just disgusting videos of Pete Buttigieg taking a stroll with his partner the other night. So we can all agree with Vladimir Putin that we've got people in the West that want to destroy us. So let me make one more comment. I want to. So for example, here's an article from the AC, Jewish Chronicle, published in the UK last Friday. And see here, this is an exclusive article that they had. Criminals are tracking British Jews for Iran's killing squads. So there is a concern. There's a lot of tension right now between Israel and Iran and what's going to happen. Is Israel going to attack Iranian sites? There was an attack the other day in Damascus. It was designed and I believe took out some of the leading Iranian drone guys that were having a meeting. I mean, Israel seems to know everything that's going on everywhere. And Russia's come out and been very critical of that attack. I'm sure it's going to get some UN Security Council condemnation. And Netanyahu gave an interview with the Wall Street Journal the other day about his book. And he was talking about maybe making peace with Saudi Arabia. That's kind of a significant thing. And he keeps talking about it. He thinks it's going to happen. I'm going to cover that more on Sunday. But he was also talking about we got to stop Iran. So this is when he came into office again back in December. He said he had 3 things on his agenda. Number 1 was deal with the Iranian issue. Number 2, peace with Saudi Arabia. And so when he did this interview with the Wall Street Journal the other day and a historian named Walter Russell Mead, he said those 2 things that he wanted to do, number 1 and number 2 items on his agenda, were at the forefront in that interview. Sunday, I will also talk and try to explain the insanity going on in the Israeli Knesset as they have pushed forward the governing coalition and the government, Netanyahu and the conservative, right-wing religious parties, Orthodox and ultra-Orthodox parties have pushed for some judicial reform. This has been an issue that has been coming up in Israeli politics for decades. It really kind of came up when there was the forced evacuation of Jewish communities from Gaza back in 2004 or 5. By the way, we kind of pushed that. And then we had Katrina right after that. That's a long story too. I do think they're connected. And so some people are concerned that the Netanyahu coalition is going far in pushing judicial reform. I'll show you some videos of opposition parties are crawling over tables. They're sitting, they're having to be drug out of the Knesset rooms. And I was just in those Knesset rooms 2 months ago when I went to the media summit. So I think Netanyahu, one of the things he's pushing right now is he needs the U.S. to step up and join him in dealing with the Iranian issue. And I think he thinks that if he gets that might help him with the Saudis. So there's a lot of, there's so many things going on here that are just incredible. And, and the Saudis are kind of making nice with Putin and China about maybe replacing the dollar as the reserve currency for the sale of oil and gas. And that would have a big impact on the United States. And everything that I'm reading is that whatever we thought were volatile economic conditions last year are worse right now. And it's very hard to say how they're going to go. So I think you need to prepare, lay in some stocks. If you have prescriptions you need, try to get extras, because I don't know what's going to happen. We're really in a war footing, and it's very concerning. And it's kind of weird because I sit here and I read all of this stuff. And today I went and played golf because it's 72 degrees in Columbus, Ohio today. And it will be 20 degrees tonight. So it is a crazy world. So if anybody's just got a couple quick questions, maybe just type them all caps. I don't have time to scroll back through. So if you did it, by the way, on whether Russian did it or not, I got a lot of criticism. Oh, Haller, you're just part of the New World Order. You don't understand. It was our government that did it to us. And that's possible, okay? But I'm just saying there's a Russian playbook, and you need to understand too. I have sort of a group of people that I trust, some of whom are Russian experts, that they think it might have been Russia that did this. And by the way, we're having a lot of attacks on infrastructure here in a lot of things are going wrong here on infrastructure. And we had a plant blow up, near Cleveland on the southeast side of Cleveland the other day. But we also need to be rational this. I saw a lady, I'm sure she meant well, she did a video, and it was kind of interesting because she does this video and everything's going on. And in the video, she says, and I'm not so sure that the contaminated water had not made its way up 70 miles up to Cleveland, and that caused the fire in the metal plant in Cleveland. Now, I just think that that's kind of silly. You need to be careful before you make such a claim. First of all, the water flow is away from that direction. So I don't think it has any connection. But it was interesting. I just looked, she has when I saw it yesterday, the video had been up for about 15 hours. She has 60,000 subscribers, about the same number of subscribers as we have on our YouTube channel. And she had 90,000 views in 15 hours because it was pretty extreme. So then I look over and I see a video where there's a church. It's a local TV station up in the Cleveland area, and they go to East Palestine out, and there's a church that's setting up a food bank. They're allowing clinics to be set up in the church, and they think that they'll be there for a couple months, 3 months, 4 months, 6 months, a year, who knows. But the church is donating their rooms so the people can set up there. It's a small town. And the one guy, he came in, he said, I live a few miles away and I feel fine, and here's some water, and we don't seem to be having any trouble. And so that video was sort of calming in a way. I don't know that it addresses the serious issues that are up there, but it had 50 views. So if you put up a video where the world's coming to an end, you'll get 90,000 views. If you put up a video of someone saying, my life seems kind of normal, but people are struggling around here right now, and some people have problems. You get 50 views. So it's kind of interesting the way, if it bleeds, it leads. Isn't that true with these stories? So we live at this time where things, I think, are going to be extremely disrupted for the foreseeable future. Wars, rumors of wars, all of that stuff. I think we're in those times. So we need to be in the Word. We need to be fellowshipping with other believers. We need to be thinking through things. Okay, because it's very easy to latch on to the extreme. And look, if there is a nuclear war, I don't know that there's much you can do to just pray that you, I don't know, survive and you've prepped and made some decisions and that type of thing. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know if there'd be tactical nukes used in Ukraine and everybody thinks it would stop there. I don't know. I mean, everybody is, everything is on a razor's edge right now. So look, the Lord's in control. And we know if we're believers, if we've believed in the gospel, we're saved, and we have accepted that free gift of grace that's offered to us. We know what's going to happen to us. Some way we're leaving this world. It may be natural death. It may be rapture. It may be killed in a war, persecuted, martyred, whatever. But we know that we're in the Lord's hands, and that's what we always need to keep in mind. So, let's see. I'll tell you what. I'll pray and we'll go on and we'll talk more about these things on Sunday. I so appreciate you listening to me kind of prattling on here. So let's pray. Lord, thanks so much for your word. Pray that you'll always help us to remember that you are in control and that those of us who are your children, who are saved, are in your hand, and that we just pray that how this ever works out, that whatever we need to do, however we need to act, that we will always remember that we are to act in a manner that will glorify you. Bless us in Jesus' name, amen. So anyway, thanks for listening, and God bless.